Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show. Y'all, it's been a day. It's been a day. But I'm here today with Dr. Nadia Lopez. And you have no idea how excited I am to do this interview. Dr. Nadia came on my radar a couple years ago, and the wife and I were just chilling, watching Black Girls Rock. And there she was. So then I had to go to Twitter, like, who is this person? And we got connected. I'm like, wow, that's dope. So today we will be talking to her about a book she co-authored, Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, as well as some other things. So, Dr. Nadia Lopez, for those who will be watching on YouTube or listening on iTunes and SoundCloud, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Dr. Nadia Lopez, founding principal of Mott Academy, located in Brownsville, Brooklyn. I opened the school in 2010. It's a middle school. We service scholars from 6th to 8th grade. But if you're not familiar with Brownsville, it's one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in all of New York City. We have an income of $11,000 per year. The average graduation rate from high school is 32%. In this particular school, we have 32% of scholars who have special needs. In addition to that, we have overage scholars in this community. When we talk about poverty, mental health issues is a great concern. Every health issue you can think of, whether it's diabetes, hypertension, asthma, we exceed the entire city of New York. So to say the least, my work is cut out. My scholars come in at a proficiency rate that is between kindergarten and 3rd grade. But the goal is by the time they leave me, they are proficient, meaning on grade level or at least close to, so that they can actually be successful in high school. So my mantra is I open the school to close a prison, because 80% of New York State folks who are incarcerated come from communities like Brownsville, East New York, Far Rockaway. So that's kind of my elevator pitch of who I am and what I do.
Well, who is Dr. Nadia Lopez? And I was reading in the book that you started out at Verizon, which I did not know. So what drew you from the corporate grind to public education?
Well, initially I wasn't even headed into the corporate sector. So as a kid, I was really interested in anything that was STEM related. I went to college, Wagner College in Staten Island, to be a nurse. I graduated with my BSN, and I realized sometime during the journey of nursing that I don't think I want to actually be a nurse. I knew I wanted to, help people. I thought it was really fascinating that a part of nursing is the holistic approach that you get to learn about the entire person through active listening. So, they would always teach us the importance of knowing someone's history and taking time to listen to them so that you understand their behaviors and what really led them having to go into the hospital, contracting any type of diseases or anything like that. So in order to change behaviors, you need to understand one's mindset. And so I really love that. I was fascinated with psychology nursing. So psych nursing was like looking at people, studying their minds, and just understanding mental health was important, as well as critical care nursing. But like anything else, I was just not interested. I wasn't interested in pediatrics. I wasn't interested in telemetry. And so you have to have a love and understand what your calling is. And I said, in the process, I don't want to have to, have someone's life in my hands if I'm not 100% committed. So I ended up working for Verizon, the phone company. One of my friends said, who attended St. John's, that was on Wagner College's campus, was like, I worked for Verizon, and she was telling me the benefits, how much she made. And I was just like, it just didn't seem realistic. But I wanted to figure out what it is I wanted to do for my future. So I went and did an interview before I even graduated. I was given an appointment to go through the hiring process. I secured a job. And so the day of my pinning, I told my mom, I'm going to work for Verizon. And she was livid. But it helped me to understand a lot of the skills, or develop the skills that I needed in order to be an effective leader, right? So in corporate settings, you have to know about data. Everything is about data, which you need to know in education. You also, I dealt with account collection. So dealing with irate customers is the same as dealing with an irate parent or a community member. So understanding that people aren't necessarily upset with you, but upset with their circumstances. So that was really, really beneficial. But it also gave me an opportunity of seeing, what the real world is like. And so when you're in education and you want your scholars to be great and you want them to go into various industries, you need to know what those industries are like. So I had worked for the Department of Health. I had worked for the Gap. I had worked for Verizon. So I felt like once I got into education, I could come with a more informed mindset of saying, these are the things you really need to prepare for, it just helped me to grow as an individual.
Cool. Now, recently, I watched you on an Instagram live video.
Yes.
You thought about quitting. What's this all about? And what made you what got you to that point, and what made you decide to stay?
Being in education is really hard. And I just want to put this out there that I think that a lot of times on social media, we see the flowery part of the work, right? So we always keep each other encouraged. We're saying all the great things, but it is hard. It's hard dealing with adults. It's hard dealing with the mandates that education has placed upon us. And so I just found, like, as a leader, you're expected to know everything, and you're constantly feeling like you can never be weak, vulnerable, ask a question, because then people are looking at you like, but you're the leader. And while we are mandated to make sure that our staff members are developing professionally, our parents' needs are met, our scholars' needs are met, it's just like, when does somebody pour into the leader? And that wasn't happening. So I found myself, especially having opened up the school, overwhelmed and tired, and feeling like I kept telling people I need help. And there were a lot of folks who just were in this place of saying, you're Nadia, you're going to be fine. Everything is going to be great. This too shall pass. And I felt like, no, I'm spiraling. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling angry, anxious, all of these emotions that it was hard to get out of. And it's almost like when you become depressed, you go into this dark spiral. And so I'm feeling the low expectations in the building because everyone is overwhelmed. You get to certain times of the year when people just, they're exhausted, and then you're trying to pour into them. And I just started thinking about, as a parent, I've sacrificed so much. I have a teenager now. She's in her 3rd year of high school, but I've given more to everyone else's children. As an adult, like, I'm committed to my work, and I found that there were some adults who just really weren't committed to the process. And then you have an education system that oftentimes is just set up in a way that you really cannot be successful, and it's unforgiving. And so I was tired, and I felt like no one was validating how I was feeling. So I wrote my resignation letter. In between my tears, in between my mom telling me I needed to pray, I was tired and I was done. But, eventually I did pray. Eventually God did answer the call. When Humans of New York came about, it's a popular blog, and I had this scholar who said that I was his major influence. But I will say this, that was 2015. I'm now in 2018, and there are days that I just sit and I think to myself, like, I don't know if I could keep doing this. As much as I'm hopeful, as much as I want to make sure that our children across the globe are taken care of and can win. The system, and the people behind the system, the politics that plays out, you know, they're not thinking about the larger impact. And so it can be a lot.
So I want to throw this out there to you because you were talking just then. It reminds me of conversations that I have with teachers. Mm-hmm. And some teachers who, you know, they're like putting in my retirement papers, or I'm going to go work somewhere else. And a lot of schools, they have PD on curriculum mapping, how to deconstruct the standard. They have PD on this tech tool or this new software program we just brought in, lesson planning, behavior, etc. But I don't see them doing PD on how to decompress from your day. Mm-hmm. How do you sort of reconnect with your higher purpose and sort of leave the school not emotionally drained? What do you say to school leaders about working with teachers so they do feel fulfilled and not get to that point to where I cannot take another day?
Well, here's where I'm going to start with. We have to do the same for our school leaders. And that's really the problem, right? Like, in order for I have to model my expectations for my staff. And if I'm at a place where I've been deprived, if I'm at a place where I have myself not been shown how to decompress, how to take time, then it would be hard for me to then show my staff how to do the same things, right? Because you model what you know. And a lot of leaders, it's the grind. Like, it's not that we don't care. It's not that, and I'm not going to say for all leaders, I'm going to say for myself and plenty of people that I know. I love my team. I want my team to win. I want them to know that they are just dynamic. They can be successful. And I also push them to work as a team, that sometimes they need to uplift each other. They need to find a friend, give a hug, write a note, because everything can't be on me as the principal. So I instill that in them. But at the same time, as principals, we have to find groups. We have to find outside of our spaces, outside of work. You have to find those people who are going to help you off the ledge. You have to find that yoga group. You have to find that praying group, somebody. People who, when you get around them, you feel like you're poured into, and they show you strategies. And it doesn't have to be like a professional development strategies, but just simple things, right? You know, you go to a brunch and you notice how the place setting is done, or a little note that they leave on the table. And when you come to work, you'll do the same thing for your staff. You may do a brunch or a breakfast for your staff, but you'll have little notes for them, note cards or something like that. It's really, really important for us to start, like, no one likes the top-down approach when it comes to education, but we have to start pouring into the top so that the top can start making better decisions and really being able to pour into everyone else who comes underneath, right? Now, as far as the teachers are concerned, you know, I think that what happens is that there's not enough, everybody's working in isolation, and there's not enough moments of just being positive, because we're always looking at what's wrong, because we've been taught in this system everything is wrong. Your data, you're this, you're that. It's like you're never winning. Even if you're doing well, someone will find a reason to say you're not doing well enough. You're compared to someone else, you know? So we've kind of created this culture as educators of trying to outdo each other. And at the end of the day, it's, you know, we're supposed to be the most compassionate. We're supposed to be the most nurturing. We're supposed to be the most understanding. But we've now gone into this space because of all of these external forces that have now created policies that make us compete against each other. But I don't want to say it's in every space. It's not in every single space. But until we start having different conversations, until we start addressing that education does matter, teachers matter, administrators matter, and still until we start having conversations that are more informed, because as you said, like a lot of professional development is all about the data, because that's all we talk about, you know. But for me, like in my space right now, mental health is a real issue. And so I'm like, how do we decompress from that? How do you decompress from the parent who comes in whose child is depressed, the parent is depressed, and it's part of the family's genetics, right? But they're overwhelmed, you know, and then you start to take that on, and that lives out in your building. It just becomes a lot. So for me, I've instituted yoga in my space. You know, every Monday, my staff has the opportunity of participating in yoga. It's for an hour and a half. They don't pay for it. It's provided for them. I also have a mental health provider who comes in twice a week to talk to my staff. I think that's really important because you can't tell your paraprofessionals, your guidance counselors, your teachers to go out there and champion for these kids, and no one's championing for them, right? And we all know that sometimes the word therapy becomes a turnoff depending on what community you're in. Mm-hmm. So I give up my space in my office where someone comes in and speaks to them literally twice a week from 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And that's been since I opened up the school. And then, you know, I try every month to do some type of luncheon for my team, something that just lets them know, like, I appreciate you for coming in.
That's all right. You're hiring?
I'm hiring.
We all know about the outsiders who tell us you are a successful school or a failing school because of this test score or that test score or your graduation rates or your attendance rates, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on what is transpiring in public education?
It's concerning. I think that the fact that we're not even talking about education on a national level in terms of the U.S. education, like we haven't heard anything, what's really going on. And anytime there's an address, education is no longer at the forefront, you know? And so my greatest concern is that society as a whole, we're not paying attention. Like education is the foundation of where everything stems from, right? So whether it's business, technology, medicine, art, anything, it starts with education. And we're not having a conversation about it. We're not talking about the policies that are literally hindering the passion that no longer exists in the classroom because everyone is just trying to get through the standards, right? And what's so crazy about the standards is that by the time you unpack the standards, you don't even really know what you're teaching. The standards doesn't match up to the test. And there's a lot of people making profits, and it's not our children. It is companies that come up with these exams that they get to change at any given moment. And so we're all measured by these tests. But then when these children go into college, they're not measured by those tests. You know what I mean? So between 3rd and 8th grade, our kids are already feeling like failures. Our teachers are feeling like failures. Our schools are looking like they fail. And so people come about and say, we're failing children. And it's an attack on public education. And I want to be clear, it's every sector because there are charter schools that are closing as well as public schools that are closing, right? Or they're being looked at as schools under reconstruction because we're not saying what it is that we as a whole that we're getting to, which is really like the premise of the book, Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We want to prepare our children for the future. And we already know that most of the careers that they're going to have are not the ones that exist today. So we're not focusing on the skills that they need to develop. We're not focusing on the ability to work as teammates, the ability to really engage in conversations and collaborate, the ability to think critically. We're just teaching them to get through curriculum and then passing the buck if they didn't master something. Like, we're not taking time for them to really dig deep, grapple, understand. So now when you have CEOs from companies, like I speak to people in the business sector and they'll tell me, like, you know, the quality of candidates that we have, it's like slim to none because they can't think on their own. They can't think and analyze. Like, everything has to be told to them step by step by step. And that's because we don't have enough time for kids to just sit, think, and talk and really think through things, which is unfortunate, right? Technology is great, but we can't make it the end all be all. You know, a computer cannot teach a child to become compassionate, to be understanding, to be empathetic. These are all of the things that they need in order to thrive in the real world.
Excuse me. There's just so much to say on that because, you know, my job is as an instructional technologist. And when I come to teachers, it's always about how can students go from consuming to actually creating, to where students own their learning. I just did a SAMR presentation yesterday, and I was telling the teachers, if you're working harder than your students, you're doing too much. Because your students at the end of the day must own their learning, and you can't spoon feed them everything. They have to control what they get out of it. So you just mentioned the book. It's an awesome book, people, by the way. You are the co-author of Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. What was the pain point behind writing the book?
Well, you know, it was 6 of us in a space. We are all from the Global Teacher Prize that was created by the Varkey Foundation. So there is what's considered the Nobel Peace Prize of Education. Every single year, there's $1 million prize at stake. And so we're part of the top 50 from different cohorts. The team leader, I would say, is Armand Doucette, and he's from Canada. And he came up with this idea of wanting to really capture on a global level what's happening in the classrooms that is not often spoken about, right? Because a lot of communities are dealing with social justice issues, yet we still have to prepare our children for the 21st century. And so if we're talking about models of success and we're talking about really getting kids to become productive citizens, why aren't we looking at what's existing today? And so for us, it's like, I work in Brownsville, Brooklyn, but Mike Sosko, who lives in Pennsylvania, in a more conservative part of Pennsylvania, doesn't have the same demographics as I do. But what we find is an issue is just, how do we best prepare our kids? And our teachers developed professionally, and, you know, what are the policies that are in place? And so it kept going back to, our education system really needs to be revamped. But there are educators who are doing the work. And so if we can highlight what that looks like, and we can talk about best practices and really start honing in on, you know, collectively, we can start making the change. Because the system is just way too big and convoluted that we can actually see this exists. Because everyone is saying, well, where is this happening? But it's happening in various countries throughout Africa where you have the poorest populations, right? But they're able to think, they're able to create, they're passionate about their learning, they show up, and so are the teachers. So at minimum, we have a responsibility to ensure that these individuals do develop professionally, that we do start to say that it's not those kids, but our children, right? And that we start to say, if we're going to look at technology, how can we communicate and create global citizens around the world by just using Skype? How do we develop a Twitter community so that a teacher who may be in India can connect with someone who's in Spain or the United States and talk about best practices? Because what we find is that the children's needs are the same in terms of maybe not the curriculum or the expectations of what the particular country wants, but they must learn certain skills to be successful. And as a principal, just what you were saying is that we need to teach children to own and create. Like, I realize that in this community, the average income is so far below the poverty line that it's insane. So I decided that I was going to implement a course of entrepreneurship that the scholars must take for the entire year. That's something that we can easily show others around the world, like, you can do this. How do you partner with various corporations and businesses, even in your immediate area, to just bring guest speakers in, to talk about their passion? How did they turn it into a business, right? Because some people create a business with only $40 in their pocket. But unless we show the children what the possibilities of that, they will never see what they can do in their future. So it's really about, I'm proud of this book. I'm proud of the authors who are part of it, as well as the models that we use, because it comes from other teacher prize finalists. You know, they come from the Philippines, they come from Australia, they come from Palestine, they come from all over the world. And so it's to say that let's not minimize education to one specific country or community. Globally, it is a community issue. And we have to stand up and take charge and say what we're going to do in order to make the changes and really come together.
And I'm glad you said that, excuse me, because, you know, this is a whole new generation of learners we have here, whose, you know, first experience to a connected device, to the digital space, is usually a smartphone or a tablet. You know, they're Snapchatting and doing the Facebook and all those things, which, well, them cell phones at school, boy. What do you say to those leaders, or what are some of the challenges that school leaders are facing in this ever evolving educational landscape?
I think first and foremost, it's, you know, as leaders, we didn't come up in this generation, right? So sometimes the thing about education is that we get stuck in our ways and how we learned and what we were exposed to. And so we have to break out of that. We have to embrace change, because that's really what it is. We have to be able to embrace change and then really start to figure out how can we integrate it into our everyday practices, right? It makes no sense to try to fight what already exists. But how do you leverage it in a way where it can build community, communication, culture, and develop global citizenship? So, you know, for us, we do Skype sessions with our special guests. Like, if I can't get a guest to physically come here to Brownsville, I will not hesitate to use Google Hangouts. I don't hesitate to use Skype. You and I communicating through Zoom. I've had plenty of meetings through Zoom. You know, in addition to that, you know, I tell my team all the time, you all need to get on Twitter. There's so much that's going on Twitter. There's so many great ideas, especially, you know, there's a lot of school communities where it's just a lot of negativity and you just feel like you're not growing. So create a community online of individuals who are really about learning. You know, it's amazing how many people that you can reach. And I tell them all the time, the person that you thought you cannot contact, you can reach on Twitter. You know, follow them, join a Saturday conversation, get some resources, and build that into professional development. And even as leaders, getting ideas from other leaders, right? Because we can be so confined to our buildings from the time we walk in to the time that we leave. And the last thing we want to do is talk about education, but we find ourselves talking about education. So if you find ways of integrating that into learning, we started a book club with my scholars. And part of our goal is we started it with Epi Udo, who is from the Utah Jazz. And so he has a book club in which he engages group members in a Twitter chat. So our thing is we're going to engage our scholars in a Twitter chat with him because we're reading the book Kindred, as well as have Skype sessions as long as his schedule allows. But he's been here, but physically every day he can't come. But how great is it for our scholars to see someone of his magnitude invested in reading, in learning, and engaging in a conversation with them about a book that they're reading as well. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's so powerful. So when our leaders are also developed professionally so that they can see the power of using social media, creating a website, creating a school Twitter account, creating a Facebook account. We have all of those things so that we can communicate all the great things that are happening in our school as well. And guess what happens? Our kids start to follow it and really understand the importance of how they present themselves online. Because that becomes the other issue, right? How they communicate themselves online. And so now they have a model of, I need to live up to this standard online because this is my school. So it's all about education is on so many levels. And once we're in education, we have not arrived. We still have a lot of learning to do before we can actually begin to really have sound teaching and practice.
So I want to throw this out there to you because you're talking, what I'm hearing from you is about school culture. Mm-hmm. And in your school, you have your purposeful royalty and you speak to your students. You speak to your students in a certain way. You refer to them as a certain way, in a certain manner. A lot of schools have testing, but they don't have that culture, what I would say uplifts. Mm-hmm. It's data, but you still have sort of kids who go to school every day, but don't know who they are and where they're going. So a school can be 90%, Black folk, but no Black history programs or no people who from the community who come in who are doing well to speak to them, to mentor them. Mm-hmm. What do you say to those schools that have failed to bring in that sort of culture that inspires students and amplifies their own voices to where they themselves start to say, I can be more than what I have seen all of my life?
I would say you fail to know your community. And so it goes back to my time and practice in nursing. You have to be an active listener. You have to know those you're serving and really understand from their point of view. You have to be empathetic. I wrote a proposal for Mott Bridges Academy. It was about 80 some odd pages long. It was an arduous process to get through a committee of folks to explain why I should open up a school. And I will tell you, a large majority of that proposal does not exist in the school. Every single year I have changed something. Like when I walked in, it was data driven. It was, we're going to do, everyone's going to be excited about STEAM. And the folks came in here and they were just like, the kids, I love my scholars, but they were the ones that nobody wanted. And they showed up and they showed out, right? And so what I realized is I can't fit them into this box. So I used the data, but in a way that was going to help them understand why they had to become better. I explained to them why we chose the colors of Black and purple. I wanted them to know that they were descendants of greatness. I wanted them to know that they were significant, even though the stats against them told them otherwise. I would show up every day early. I would wear the colors myself. Like to this day, I still wear the colors of purple and black every single day. Today, I happen to be wearing Be Cool, Be Kind because that's one of our initiatives, and all of our scholars have that t-shirt, right? But I really, really had to embody what I expected. So my scholars, when they came in, literally I would have children out of 180 days of attendance, at minimum had 50 days absent, at minimum. And the other days they were always late. So my attendance was 40%. And I was just like, oh, we can't function. So I created a model that was miss a minute, miss a day, miss a lot. If you're not here, I can't teach you. If you're not here, you can't graduate. If you're not here, you're going to end up in jail. If you're not here, you're going to end up in prison. You're going to end up dead. So I need you to be here. Miss a minute, miss a day, miss a lot. I called the New York Knicks. I sent them emails until they responded. And I said, I need you to help me with these young people. Send me anything that you can give away for free. T-shirts, books, pens, paper, I don't care what it is. I had my scholars' attendance on the board. Every time they would come in, we would cheer, clap them up. The attendance started to increase. We gave them free incentives, right? That was one thing. All of their scores were across the board in my office. I would show them, this is where you're at. We need to increase this. So every time they would pass through my door, I'm like, what's your scores looking like? But it wasn't about, I want you to be at 100%. If they were at 45%, I wanted them to be at 55%. I wanted them to get to 65%, because the worst thing you can do to a child is say, I need you to be at 90. And then when they fall short of it, they don't want to do anything else. We're going to do small increments. I need to see greatness come out of you. By the time my scholars graduated in 8th grade, they understood that everything that I was doing was for them to be better than how they came in. That got the buy-in of the parents. That got the buy-in of the community. And then people were just willing to show up, because I wasn't asking them for money. I was simply asking them for their time. I was asking them for 2 hours, just come in, and that's your way of mentoring my kids. But I walked the community. Like, I didn't just come to work, sit in my office, and then leave and go back home. I would walk the community. I would go to the same stores that they shopped in. I understood that the first thing I would see in a corner store was beer as opposed to water. That there was no type of food that was healthy or beneficial for these children, which is why most of my families are literally dying while they're in my care with their kids. You know what I mean? So I understood what was lacking. I also understood that my teachers could not empathize with my scholars because they could look like them in terms of they're people of color, but they haven't had the same experience. You know what I mean? So we have this bias that comes into the building because we just think that these children should want to learn. That's not necessarily the case. I have parents who have kids at the age of 11 who have more than 3 or 4 kids, right? So my parents didn't graduate middle school. So how can they empower their children to want to do better if this is a cycle? So it's my job, it's my responsibility as that leader to show up and know those that I'm serving. And every single year, like I tell you, we have to deal with social media a lot. How do we integrate that into our instruction? We have to deal with the scholars being in gangs. So here's our colors. We repping our gang. It's our purple and black every single day. You have to inspect what you expect, but you have to model what you want to see happen.
Whew, that was deep. If I could reach my tea right now, I'll take a sip. In your chapter, you wrote about the importance of technology and partnerships with outside entities and how it's imperative to prepare students for the constant change of disruption brought on by technology and globalization. Mm-hmm. How does a teacher or a school administrator overcome their biases and resistance to the digital world we live in? And here's the kicker on that. There are schools who will spend thousands of dollars to go one-to-one and still run school the same way they've done it before. Will still teach the same way they've done it before. Even though all of their technology is there, it's business as usual.
I mean, you have a valid question, but I just think that people complain about what the problem is in education without having the audacity to want to change it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel that anything that I'm doing at Mott Bridges Academy is exceedingly above what anybody else can do. I just see and experience all of the changes that's happening. And I start to unravel, like, what do we need to do in order to make sure that our kids are being prepared for it? So I don't know every piece of technology that exists, because every single day someone could come into my office and say, hi, we are offering something new that's better than what you have. Because literally that's how technology works, right? But it's a matter of, what do you want the kids to be able to achieve at the end of the day? And really getting the type of professional development that the technology that you put in, those individuals are coming in to develop partnerships. I find that oftentimes you buy things and then the company goes their way and you're stuck with this piece of equipment and it doesn't work the way it needs to work. And so it just sits kind of on the shelf, and it's cute for, to be propped up to say you have it, but it really never gets used. Some of it is impractical, to be quite honest. I think that oftentimes we want to have more than we need to for the purpose of saying that we're in the 21st century. You don't need all of those things, because it becomes a distraction. And the minute that the technology doesn't work, those very teachers are like, I don't know what to do. But as leaders, it's important for us to actually go into buildings where it is living out, because you got to be inspired as well, right? You take that teacher who's technology savvy or the one who's really resistant, and you take a school visit and see what's happening somewhere else, and develop relationships in that school and say to that person, how can you help me? Can I have my teachers come over? Can you have your teachers come over? Because at the end of the day, I think sometimes we get stuck in our egos and not wanting to say that we don't know because we're supposed to know. I'm okay with saying I don't understand or I don't know. I'm okay with inviting someone else into my house and saying, help me with this. But it's important that we see it and see how it's done and get feedback, right? Because that's the only way we learn. The things that we want our children to be able to do, I find that adults are the most resistant and don't want to do that. So they'll get mad that the kids don't want to turn and talk and do accountable talk. But then you're in a PD and you don't want to turn and talk. You don't want to share out. So unless you see it happening where you start to say to yourself, wow, this could be a benefit, it changes the mindset, which is, I know one of the things that we talked about before was like this idea of why would I want to have the kids go to Harvard, and be able to put their feet on that ground? Because I just want them to be able to see what's possible. It's the same thing. You have to see what's possible, and then you start to formulate ideas of how can I get it done. There's so much power in that. And it doesn't cost you anything.
Okay. So I want to start to end this podcast by talking to you about modeling and access to mentors and representation. Because you just brought that up with the Harvard. How did that come about for those who don't know? And how did your students, how did they respond, once they got on Harvard and was able to sort of see what people say is one of the most iconic institutions in the US or in the world?
Harvard came about because part of Humans of New York, the success of the story was that Brandon Stanton, who's the founder, asked me, what do you want to see? I think there's so many people invested in wanting to help you. And I literally said to him, I want my scholars to be able to see their future path. And they'll never think or expect that they could ever make it to Harvard. And it wasn't about making sure that every single one of them have this idea that I'm going to go to Harvard. I just felt that it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I actually had gone to Harvard that I realized that the only reason why I didn't apply or consider it is because I had thought to myself that I wasn't going to be good enough to go there, or it was only for a select group of people. It wasn't for the girl from Brooklyn whose parents are immigrants. It wasn't for me. And once I got there, I realized like people weren't any different from me. There wasn't this feeling of you don't belong here. And so we were able to raise a considerable amount of money. At the time, it was $1.4 million for Harvard trips to college, as well as summer programming and scholarships. Because my belief is once we actually make sure the children are prepared to go to college, one of the things that keeps them from college is the financial obligations that they're required to make. So with that said, we got the scholars to go to Harvard, and that first year we took all 200 scholars plus the entire staff, and parents got to come as well. And so folks who were never here on time, ever on time, were here at 5:45, 4 o'clock in the morning. We weren't leaving until maybe 6. They were here, ready. And there was just something about getting to a place where they thought that they could never get to. And it was really breaking the glass ceiling for them. And so once we got there, my scholars actually had, Harvard had professors who agreed to teach a class to them. So my scholars went into an art class that was studying 15th century art. My kids study 15th century art. I was actually able to engage in a conversation, and the professor was like, how do you know this? And they're like, because we learn art in our school and we do it as an art history class. And he's like, this is middle school? You know, they went into another class and learned about zebrafish and had learned about various species in their science class and was able to engage in a conversation. And what came up of that when we all came back together as a collective is that the scholars realized that they are smart enough. They felt like college isn't for me because I don't think I'm going to ever be smart enough to be here. And they realized that the very things that they're learning in middle school applies to what they will be learning in college, but on a higher level. And so now that I'm going into, this is our 8th year, we're graduating our 2nd class. You know, my scholars now see the importance of wanting to either go into college or get into a career that they really love based off of following their passions and developing skills along the way. And so for me, if you put the children, if you put the adults in the places that we want them to aspire to go, they can step up to that plate. Because even for my teachers, it was a moment for them to understand, like, this is what your work is for. This is where we want to see them get to. College, a career, whatever it is. But you have to see that you also belong here. And it was overall powerful. For a lot of them who thought that they would never want to go to college, you had children just saying, I'm going to go to college now. And they owned it and they believe it. So, you know, I would always say to any school leader, you know, it doesn't have to be a Harvard. Develop relationships with your local community college or university, your alma mater, and just schedule a trip. It's what it does for your school community is just really make sure that everyone knows that they have a place where they can go.
And Harvard is a beautiful campus.
It is.
Cambridge is beautiful as well.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed my time living in Boston. It's expensive though.
It is. But however, you know, it could be quite expensive. But if your parents make a certain amount, there's an endowment that makes sure that they don't have to pay their full tuition. They can get a scholarship. So regardless of what, you know, that's another thing that keeps our children back from going to college is that they think that they could never afford it. And there's so many institutions that have created opportunities by which they can go to college without having to pay a dime. So in New York State, we have, opportunities that if children, if their parents make less than $100,000 or $125,000, they can go to city or state college for free. They just have to take advantage of it.
That is all right.
Yes, our governor, he did right by our children. So,
so before we go, my last question to you, and this is a selfish question on my part.
Okay.
When you found out that you were being awarded a Black Girls Who Rock award, like what went through your mind? And as you're sitting on that stage and you're looking out and you're seeing like just Black excellence all around you, how did that feel?
It was hard to process at first because when I got the call from Beverly Bonds, and then she was just like, and you can't tell anyone. I'm like, okay. It was exciting because one, it's one of those things where you realize the impact that you can have on the lives of others and what this means in context, right? But the fact that Michelle Obama was going to be there and she was in the space, and Ava DuVernay was there, and Jada Pinkett and Erykah Badu, it was just that night, it was just the selection of the folks who were being honored at the same time, right? I don't believe, I can't say that I was starstruck. I just felt like God said, this is where you belong. I can't even describe, but it was just like, there was a level of humility that you experience, but just knowing that I belong in this space. And when it was time for me to speak, it was me owning a moment of, you don't know what it's like as a woman of color in leadership and to always be put down in places and be told that why are you fighting so hard for those kids? You're begging for money and they're taking it away. Like there was just so many layers that was unfolding for me at that given moment on that night. And to be amongst excellence, to be amongst my peers, to just for that moment to have this honor, to thank those in that space. Cicely Tyson was in there. It was just a powerful evening. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity of being honored by Black Girls Rock. I'm thankful that I got to meet Ava DuVernay, who's amazing. But most importantly, to speak to Michelle Obama, who she whispered in my ear, she said to me, you can't give up. It's not allowed. We are all watching you, and you're doing God's work. And so that was the most humbling experience, because sometimes you feel like no one is watching. You feel like you're in this game by yourself, and that, at any given moment, the curtains will close and people will forget. And so it was a moment to always remember.
Wow. Woo! That's how you end the show right there. That was all right. Wow, Doc. Thank you for coming on the show and blessing me with your greatness today.
Thank you for having me. So to everyone who is out there watching this, I would really appreciate if you could support purchasing The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Standing on the Precipice. All of the proceeds actually go towards teacher development as well as teacher projects around the world. So the only benefit that I get is to pour into others so that they can be great. And it comes from the voices of dynamic, extraordinary teachers from around the world who are doing phenomenal things. So I'm grateful for the opportunity given to me by Varkey, as well as you, Dr. Will, for having me on your show today.
Well, thank you. This show is coming out tonight. I'm not going to save this one to roll out. This is coming out tonight. People.
Excellent.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Nadia Lopez, for coming on the show.
Well, you have a great evening and continue to be blessed.
Well, thank you very much. Your people, you know how I do this. The video cast is going up on YouTube. I need you to go there, subscribe, check out what's going on iTunes, SoundCloud. Go and subscribe. Tell everyone you know. Check out the Dr. Will show and do it, people, because I'm trying to get Oprah Winfrey on the show. All right. That's my goal.
Same birthday. So, you're getting closer.
Awesome. So people, as always, invest in you. EDU. Peace.